The rifle butt cracked against the nurse's station counter like a thunderclap, and every person on the fourth floor froze. The man screamed something nobody could understand, swinging the barrel toward a mother clutching her infant in the hallway. "Nobody moves or I start with the kids." He was sweating through his jacket, eyes wild, finger already on the trigger. 3 nurses dropped to the floor. A child somewhere behind a closed door began to cry. Security was 6 minutes away. 6 minutes was a lifetime. And the only person standing between that rifle and 20 sleeping children was the nurse that everyone in this hospital had already written off as useless. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The night Avery Kaine first walked onto the floor of Mercy Heights Medical Center, she did something that nobody on the staff would ever forget, though not for the reason most people remember their first days at a new job. She got lost. Not slightly turned around, not briefly confused by the layout of a building she had never been in before. She stood at the intersection of 2 identical-looking corridors on the 3rd floor for nearly 4 minutes, holding a stack of patient intake forms, reading the signs above each hallway with the same careful expression a person uses when they are reading something in a foreign language. A passing orderly eventually pointed her in the right direction, and she thanked him so softly that he had to ask her to repeat herself. That was how it started. By the end of her first week, the whispers had already begun. Not cruel ones yet, those came later, but the kind of quiet, sideways observations that travel through hospital staffs the way water moves through cracks in concrete. Slow, patient, and ultimately impossible to stop. People noticed that she moved differently than the other nurses. Not slower, exactly. More like she was always thinking about each step before she took it, as if the floor itself might be unreliable. They noticed that she rarely made eye contact with anyone she passed in the hallway. They noticed that she ate her lunches alone, always in the same chair in the break room corner, always facing the door. They noticed, most of all, that she struggled. Her paperwork came back with errors, small ones mostly. A transposed number here, a missed checkbox there. But in a medical environment where precision is the difference between a patient going home and a patient going into cardiac arrest, small errors are not small. Her supervisor, a sharp-edged woman named Charge Nurse Patricia Hollis, pulled her aside after the 3rd incident in 2 weeks and spoke to her in the flat, careful tone of someone who has delivered this particular speech before and does not enjoy giving it. "Avery," Patricia said, "I need you to understand something. This isn't a place where we learn on the job. Not at this level. The patients in this ward are trusting us with their lives. Their families are trusting us. The doctors are trusting us. And right now, I'm having a very hard time trusting you." Avery looked at her. Her face was still. Her hands were folded in her lap with a precision that was almost unsettling in someone who appeared to be receiving a reprimand. "I understand," she said. "I'll do better." Patricia waited for more. An explanation, an excuse, something. But Avery simply held her gaze and said nothing else. And Patricia dismissed her because she genuinely did not know what else to do. The errors continued, not more frequently, but consistently enough to keep Avery's file growing in HR. A medication administered 15 minutes late, a vital signs chart that was documented in the wrong patient's record, a 4th line that she had to be corrected on, twice, by a first-year resident who was visibly embarrassed to be the one doing the correcting. Each incident traveled through the department with the speed and enthusiasm of something people genuinely enjoy talking about, and Avery Kaine became, within 60 days of her arrival, the unofficial cautionary tale of Mercy Heights Medical Center. "Did you hear about what she did last night?" became a sentence that preceded stories about her the way dark clouds precede a storm. And people listened and shook their heads and wondered loudly to each other how someone like that had passed her board certifications, let alone gotten hired at a level 1 trauma center. Dr. Marcus Brennan was not someone who whispered. He was 44 years old and had been the head of emergency medicine at Mercy Heights for 6 years, during which time he had built the department into something that genuinely deserved the reputation it carried. He was brilliant, and he knew it, and he had the particular personality type that tends to develop in people who have been told from an early age that they are brilliant. Impatient with imperfection, contemptuous of excuses, and absolutely convinced that his reading of any situation was the correct one. He had overseen the hiring of over 30 nurses in his tenure, and he had a standard that was, by any fair measure, extraordinarily high. He had also fired 11 of them, and he had not lost a single night of sleep over any of those decisions. He became aware of Avery Kaine approximately 3 weeks into her employment, when one of his residents mentioned her name in the context of a patient handoff that had gone poorly. He pulled her file. He read it twice, and then he walked to Patricia Hollis's office and sat down across from her desk and said, in a voice that he did not bother to moderate, "Why is she still here?" Patricia, who had her own complicated feelings about Avery, said carefully, "She hasn't done anything that rises to the level of termination. She's done 5 things that rise to the level of serious concern," Brennan said. 5, in 60 days. Do you know how many concerns my best nurses have generated in 60 days? 0. Do you know how many concerns my average nurses generate? Maybe 1. Maybe. He leaned forward. She's an outlier, Patricia, and not the good kind. She shows up every shift, Patricia said. She's never late. She never calls in sick. She works nights without complaint, and she handles the pediatric ward patients with, I'll say this, with genuine kindness. Brennan stared at her. Kindness, he repeated, with the tone of a man being told that the answer to a complex mathematical equation is a feeling. The children like her, Patricia said, and she said it with enough firmness to indicate that she considered this relevant data. Brennan stood up. The children can like her all they want. The parents are trusting us with their kids' lives, and I am not going to stake that trust on a nurse who can't document a medication chart correctly. He paused at the door. I'm watching her file. One more incident, and I'm starting the formal process. Patricia said nothing. She had already decided that she wasn't going to make it easy for him, but she also wasn't sure she could stop him, and that uncertainty sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. What she didn't tell Brennan, what she hadn't told anyone, was the one thing that had made her hesitate about Avery Kaine from the very beginning. It was not the errors. It was not the quiet strangeness of her. It was something she had seen during Avery's 3rd week, on a night when the department had received a multiple vehicle accident and the floor had erupted into the kind of controlled chaos that separates the nurses who belong there from the ones who don't. In the middle of that chaos, a man had come in with a head wound that was significantly worse than the triage assessment had indicated. He had been combative in the waiting room, shouting, swinging at the intake staff, and when he deteriorated rapidly and became violent in the treatment bay, 2 orderlies and a security guard had converged on him to restrain him. It took them 90 seconds and left 1 orderly with a bruised rib. But before any of them had reached the bay, Avery had already been inside. Patricia had seen it from 20 feet away. She had seen Avery step into that room, not run, not rush, but step, with that same unhurried certainty she always moved with. And she had seen her place herself between the combative patient and the crash cart in a way that was not a nurse protecting equipment. It was a person holding a position. And when the patient had lunged, Avery had moved to the side with a precision that Patricia's brain had not been able to categorize correctly in the moment. Not a dodge, not a flinch, a redirect, like water moving around a stone. The orderlies had arrived and taken the patient down, and Avery had stepped back and returned to her documentation, and the entire thing had lasted maybe 4 seconds. Patricia had asked her about it afterward. She had knocked on the break room door and found Avery eating a sandwich and said, as casually as she could manage, "That was something. In Bay 4 tonight, Avery had looked up. "I just didn't want him to knock over the cart," she said. Patricia had studied her face for a long moment. "Right," she'd said finally, and she'd left. She hadn't told Brennan because she didn't know how to explain it, and she hadn't told anyone else because she had the feeling, the strong and slightly unsettling feeling, that Avery Kaine would prefer she didn't. The pediatric ward at Mercy Heights occupied the 4th floor, and it was, depending on your relationship to children in suffering, either the hardest or the most important floor in the building. The patients ranged from infants to 16-year-olds, and their illnesses ranged from the routine to the catastrophic. The nurses who chose to work there, and it was always a choice, always a conscious decision, tended to be a particular kind of person: patient, steady, capable of sitting with a terrified 8-year-old at 3 in the morning and making them feel, against all available evidence, that everything was going to be okay. Avery had requested the pediatric ward assignment on her first day. Nobody had thought much of it at the time. New nurses often had preferences. But as the weeks passed and her struggles elsewhere mounted, the pediatric assignment became another data point in the ongoing narrative about her unsuitability. The children liked her, yes. The parents found her calming, yes. But calming was not competent, and likable was not qualified. And the hospital required nurses who were both of those things and more. There was a boy on the ward named Daniel. He was 7 years old and had been admitted 11 weeks earlier with a cardiac condition that had required 2 surgeries and had consumed his family so completely that his father had quietly lost his job from missed shifts, and his mother had lost 12 pounds that she couldn't afford to lose. Daniel was small for his age and had the particular quality that very sick children sometimes develop, a kind of watchful gravity, as if illness had introduced him early to certain truths about the world that most people don't encounter until much later. He had decided, in the way that children decide things, absolutely and without apparent justification, that Avery was his favorite person in the hospital. He asked for her by name when his vitals were taken. He saved the drawings he made during the day to show her when she arrived for nights. He had once, memorably, refused to take his evening medication from anyone else, a standoff that had lasted 40 minutes and had ended only when Avery came on shift, sat down next to his bed, and said, in her quiet way, "Hey, bud, I heard you've been giving everyone a hard time." And Daniel had looked at her with his grave 7-year-old eyes and said, "I wanted to wait for you." And she had said, "I know," and he'd taken his medication without another word. Patricia had been watching from the doorway. She'd turned away before Avery could see her expression, because she'd needed a moment to collect herself. And she was not a woman who collected herself in front of her staff. It was Dr. James Whitfield, the attending pediatric cardiologist assigned to Daniel's case, who first said out loud what several people on the ward had been privately thinking. He said it to Patricia, in the hallway outside Daniel's room, in a tone that was careful and professional and nonetheless unmistakably concerned. "I want to flag something," he said. "I've been watching Nurse Kaine with the patients, and I think there's something worth noting." He paused. "She is extraordinarily good with the children, better than anyone I've worked with in this specific context. And I say that having worked in pediatric cardiology for 14 years. Patricia looked at him. But there's something I can't put my finger on," Whitfield said. "Something about the way she positions herself in a room. The way she sits. She always has her back to the wall. She always knows where the door is. It's not a nursing behavior." He stopped. "I'm probably reading too much into it." "You're probably not," Patricia said quietly, and she went back to her paperwork. The incident that finally gave Brennan the opening he'd been waiting for happened on a Tuesday, 3 months into Avery's employment. A routine medication reconciliation for a post-surgical patient had resulted in a documentation error that, while caught before any harm was done, was exactly the kind of thing that generated formal incident reports, and formal incident reports generated formal reviews, And formal reviews were the mechanism by which Brennan intended to remove her from his department. He called her into his office at 6 in the morning at the end of her shift. He did not ask her to sit down. He stood behind his desk and he delivered his assessment of her performance with the systematic thoroughness of someone who has been building toward a conversation for a long time. He cited every error, every incident, every concern. He told her that he had spoken with HR and that a formal performance review was being initiated. He told her that the standard for improvement would be high and the timeline for demonstrating it would be short. He told her, in language that was technically within professional boundaries, but was designed to land with maximum impact, that in his professional opinion, she had been a mistake from the beginning. Avery stood across the desk from him and listened to all of it. She did not interrupt him. She did not look away. She did not display, at any point, the kind of distress that Brennan had perhaps been expecting, the kind that would have confirmed his narrative about her fragility. She simply stood with her hands at her sides and her eyes steady and waited until he finished. Then she said, "Is there anything else?" Brennan blinked. He had been prepared for tears, for arguments, for something. "No," he said after a moment. "That's all." "Thank you," Avery said, and she turned and left his office. In the hallway, she walked to the stairwell door, pushed it open, and descended to the hospital lobby. She stood outside in the early morning air for a long time, watching the city wake up around her, traffic beginning to gather on the street, a food cart vendor setting up on the corner across from the hospital entrance, pigeons moving along the sidewalk with the particular indifference of city animals. She stood very still and breathed very slowly, the way a person breathes when they are engaged in the deliberate act of not feeling something, or more accurately, of feeling it fully but choosing not to let it move. She had known this was coming. She had told herself it didn't matter. She had repeated that to herself on the drive to work every night for 2 weeks, and she had almost believed it. The problem was that it did matter. Not because of Brennan, not because of her career, but because of Daniel and the 3 other children on her ward, whose names she knew and whose fears she understood, and who she had made, in the private and unwitnessed accounting that governed her life now, a promise to. She was not going to leave them. Whatever Brennan did, whatever the review found, whatever HR decided, she was not going to leave those kids. She stood outside until she was sure of that. Then she turned around and went back inside. Nurse Carla Mendez had worked in the pediatric ward for 9 years and had seen every variety of nursing colleague come and go. She had liked some of them, respected fewer, and genuinely trusted almost none. She had watched Avery Kaine with the particular attention of someone who has learned that the most interesting people in any institution are rarely the loudest ones. And what she had concluded after 3 months of watching was complicated and didn't fit neatly into any of the boxes she had prepared for it. She stopped Avery in the hallway one afternoon, 3 days after the Brennan meeting, when the ward was quiet and the shift was winding down. "Hey," she said, "can I ask you something?" Avery stopped. "Sure. Did you really work in the military before this?" The question came from something Carla had noticed on Avery's intake HR form, a gap in her employment history that was filled with the words federal government service and nothing else. She had asked about it once to Patricia, who had said she didn't know more than that, and she had let it go for 3 months before her curiosity finally won. Avery was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "What branch?" Another pause. "Navy." Carla studied her. "What did you do? In the Navy?" Avery's expression didn't change. "Support work," she said, and something in the way she said it, not evasive exactly, but final, like a door closing very quietly on a room you were not invited into, told Carla that was the end of the conversation. "Okay," Carla said. "Okay, for what it's worth." She stopped. She wasn't sure what she wanted to say. She settled on, "I'm glad you're here. The kids are better with you here." Avery looked at her for a moment with an expression that Carla would think about for a long time afterward. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was more like the recognition of something you had stopped expecting to encounter. Something that moved through her face and disappeared before you could be sure you'd seen it. "Thank you," Avery said, and she went back to her rounds. That night, Daniel asked her to stay a little longer after his vitals check. He had made a drawing he wanted to show her, a figure in what he insisted was a superhero costume, which Avery very carefully did not point out looked more like hospital scrubs than a cape and tights situation. "That's you," Daniel said, pointing to the figure. "You're the hero." Avery looked at the drawing for a long moment. "That's very creative, bud," she said. "You're the strongest person in the hospital," Daniel said, with the complete conviction of someone who has given this assessment considerable thought. "I decided." Avery smiled, and it was the kind of smile that arrived slowly and meant more than a quick one would have. "I'm just a nurse," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "You're something else. I can tell." She turned off his light and told him to sleep, and she sat outside his room in the hallway for a few minutes after, thinking about nothing in particular, thinking about everything, and somewhere in the building a door opened and closed, and the night shift of Mercy Heights Medical Center continued in its ordinary way. Medications and vitals, and the particular silence of a ward full of children who were trusting the adults in the building to keep them safe. None of them knew what was coming. Not Carla, who was finishing her notes at the nurse's station. Not Patricia, who was in her office reviewing the incident report Brennan had filed. Not Dr. Whitfield, who had already gone home. Not the parents asleep in the reclining chairs beside their children's beds. Not the security guard making his rounds. Not even Avery, who sat in the hallway with Daniel's drawing in her hand and thought about the life she had left behind, and whether leaving it behind was something a person could actually do, or whether some things simply traveled with you no matter how far you walked away from them. She put the drawing in her pocket. She stood up, and she went back to work. The rest of the shift passed the way most nights passed. Not easily, because easy nights in a pediatric ward are rare, but steadily. A fever that needed managing. A child who woke at 2 a.m., crying from a nightmare, and needed 20 minutes of quiet company before she could be coaxed back to sleep. A parent who flagged Avery in the hallway with the half-suppressed panic of someone who has been watching monitors too long and needs a calm voice to tell them what the numbers mean. Avery handled each of these the way she handled all of them. Without urgency, without performance, with the flat competence of someone to whom the word routine had a different meaning than it did for most people. At 2:13 in the morning, Carla came around the corner from the supply room and nearly walked into her. "Sorry," Carla said, stepping back. "Didn't see you." "I have a habit of standing in doorways," Avery said. Carla laughed, the soft kind of laugh people allow themselves in places where noise is inappropriate. "Yeah, I've noticed it's a little..." She searched for the word. "Weird?" Avery offered. "I was going to say military," Carla said, and then immediately, "Sorry, that came out..." "No," Avery said. "That's accurate." They stood in the quiet hallway together for a moment, and Carla was about to say something else when they both heard it. The sound came from the stairwell at the end of the corridor. It was not a loud sound. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the particular sound of a door being opened by someone who is trying not to make noise. A controlled, deliberate, careful sound, and it was followed immediately by footsteps that were too heavy and too fast and too irregular to belong to a staff member. Avery heard it first. Her head turned toward the stairwell door with a precision that had nothing to do with curiosity. Carla, watching her, felt the hair on her arm stand up. Because in the 4 seconds between the sound and what happened next, she watched something move across Avery Kaine's face. Not fear, not confusion, not the ordinary alertness of a nurse on a night shift, but something older and colder and absolutely certain. Something that had no business being on a nurse's face in a pediatric ward at 2 in the morning. The stairwell door burst open, and the man came through it with a rifle. The man came through the stairwell door the way disasters always arrive. Not slowly, not with warning, but all at once, filling every available inch of space with noise and heat and the particular smell of someone who has been running and sweating and working himself up to something terrible for a long time. He was in his late 30s, broad across the shoulders, wearing a dark jacket that was soaked through at the collar. The rifle was military style, semi-automatic, held with the grip of someone who had used one before, but not recently enough. His elbows were wrong, his stance was off-center, and his breathing was the kind of ragged that told Avery two things immediately. He was scared. And scared people with rifles made mistakes that killed everyone around them. Carla made a sound beside her. A small, compressed sound, the kind a person makes when their body wants to scream and their brain overrides it by pure force of will. Avery put one hand on Carla's arm without looking at her. One firm, steady pressure that said, "Do not move." "Where is he?" the man shouted, swinging the barrel down the corridor. "I need Dr. Reyes. Somebody get me Dr. Reyes right now, or I start opening doors." His voice cracked on the last word. Avery registered that crack the way you register a crack in ice beneath your feet, as information, immediate and critical. He hadn't come to kill randomly. He had a target. He had a reason. That meant there was a window, narrow and closing, in which the situation could still be navigated without children dying. She calculated the distance between them. 42 feet, too far. 2:14 a.m. Carla's hand found her wrist in the dark and squeezed so hard that Avery felt the bones compress. "We need to call security," Carla breathed, barely a sound at all. "Security is already coming," Avery said. Her voice was flat, even, the voice of someone reading from a document. "They'll hear the noise from the stairwell alarm." She watched the man move down the corridor, opening his body angle, giving himself a wider view of the floor. He was checking rooms, checking for Reyes. "But they won't get here in time." "In time for what?" Carla whispered. Avery didn't answer. Down the hall, a door opened. One of the parents, a heavy-set man in his 50s, wearing the rumpled clothes of someone who had been sleeping in a hospital chair for weeks, stepped into the corridor with the groggy confusion of someone woken by noise, not yet understanding what kind of noise it was. He looked at the man with the rifle. He opened his mouth. "Get back inside," Avery said, her voice cutting down the hallway with a clarity and command that hit the father like a hand on his chest. He looked at her. She shook her head once, a single hard movement that left no room for interpretation, and he stepped back through the door and closed it. The man with the rifle heard her. He turned. For 1 second, they were looking directly at each other, and in that second, Avery did something that Carla would not understand until much later. She did not step back. She did not raise her hands. She stood exactly where she was, in the center of the hallway, and she looked at him with an expression that contained no fear, not the suppressed kind, not the hidden kind, but simply no fear, the way a wall contains no apology for being a wall. The man pointed the rifle at her. "You, where is Dr. Reyes?" "Dr. Reyes isn't on this floor," Avery said. Same flat voice, same stillness. "This is the pediatric ward. There are children behind every one of these doors." Something moved in his face, a flicker. Avery tracked it the way a trained eye tracks motion, precisely without reacting to it. He hadn't thought about the children, or he had thought about them and pushed the thought down, and she had just pushed it back up. "I don't care about the kids," he said. But he said it the way people say things they very much do care about. "Your hands are shaking," Avery said. The rifle barrel dipped slightly, then came back up. "Shut up." "That's not an insult. I'm telling you I can see you're not okay." She took one step forward, just one, slow and deliberate, and announced by nothing. "Tell me what happened. Tell me why you need Dr. Reyes." 2:16 a.m. Down the corridor, she could hear the soft, panicked sound of a radio being keyed. one of the night staff calling it in. The man heard it too. His head swung toward the sound and his whole body tightened. And Avery watched him recalculate, watched him feel the walls closing in, and she knew that the next 60 seconds were the most dangerous 60 seconds she had been in since a different continent, a different year, a different life that she had promised herself she had left behind completely. She hadn't left it behind. She had simply been carrying it somewhere that didn't show. "My son," the man said. It came out of him suddenly, without architecture, the way real things come out of people when they have been carrying them too long. "My son is in this hospital. He was in surgery. They told me he came through fine. And then 2 hours later he crashed, and they won't tell me what happened. They keep saying, 'Wait, wait, wait.' And I've been waiting for 6 hours, and nobody will talk to me. Nobody will." His voice broke completely. The rifle wavered. Avery took 2 more steps. Now 30 feet, now 28. "What's your son's name?" she asked. He blinked. The question reached him somewhere below the fear, below the anger, in the place where he was still just a father. "Tyler," he said. "His name is Tyler. He's 9 years old." Behind Avery, she heard Carla exhale very slowly. She heard from somewhere down the intersecting hallway to her left the distant sound of the elevator moving. Security or staff, or both. Coming from below, maybe 90 seconds out, maybe less. The man heard the elevator too. His expression collapsed from grief back into desperation, and his hands tightened on the rifle. And Avery felt the window she had been working inside shrink to the size of a needle's eye. "I need answers," he said. "I need somebody to tell me the truth about what happened to my son." "I will find Dr. Reyes," Avery said. She was 22 feet away now. Every step she'd taken had been invisible to him, absorbed into the rhythm of conversation, hidden inside his emotion. "I will bring him to you, but you need to put the rifle down first. Not for me, for Tyler. Because if security comes through that door and you're still holding that weapon, you will not be there when your son wakes up." The word "wakes" landed with intention. She had chosen it deliberately. Not if, when. The man's face cracked open. "They won't tell me if he's going to wake up." "I know," Avery said. "I know they won't. And that is terrifying. And you have every right to be terrified." She stopped moving. She was now close enough for everything. "But those children behind those doors are terrified right now too, and they didn't do anything to your son." 2:17 a.m. The elevator reached the 4th floor. The doors would open in seconds. The man looked at the corridor door, then at Avery, then at the rifle in his hands, as if he had momentarily forgotten he was holding it. "I just want to know if he's okay," he said, and his voice was the voice of a person who has been reduced to the single most essential thing about themselves. "Lower the gun," Avery said, "and I will personally walk you to your son." He looked at her. She held his eyes and did not move, and did not breathe in any way that would disturb the fragile surface of this moment. 7 seconds passed that felt like a geography, a landscape of held breath and suspended consequence. Then the barrel dropped. Not all the way, but down, angled toward the floor, and that was enough. That was the signal her body had been waiting for, the one that triggered everything that 8 years of training had built into her muscle and bone and instinct. She crossed the remaining distance in 2 steps. Her left hand came up and across the barrel in a controlled deflection, not grabbing, redirecting, using the weapon's own angle against itself. Her right hand found his wrist, not to hurt him, but to hold. She rotated. The rifle left his grip with the particular sound of a thing that has been held tightly and suddenly isn't. A soft, surprise sound, almost gentle. She stepped through him, moving him backward against the corridor wall, controlling his center of gravity without slamming him into it. And then she was simply standing there with the rifle in her hands and the man against the wall with both his wrists contained, and the whole thing had taken less time than it takes to finish a sentence. The elevator doors opened. 3 security guards came through at a run, hands on their weapons, shouting commands, and they stopped when they processed what they were seeing. A small blonde nurse standing in the corridor holding a disarmed rifle with the calm of someone who has just finished folding laundry, and a large man pressed gently against the wall saying, quietly to himself, "Tyler, Tyler, Tyler," like a prayer or a mantra, or the only word left in the world. The lead security guard, a man named Officer Ray Dominguez, who had worked hospital security for 11 years and had responded to exactly 1 prior weapons incident, stared at Avery for a full 3 seconds before his training remembered what it was supposed to do. "Ma'am, his name is Gerald Marsh," Avery said, looking at the man's hospital visitor badge that she had clocked 30 seconds into their conversation. "His son, Tyler Marsh, is a post-surgical patient, probably in the PICU or a step-down unit. He needs information about his son's condition, and he needs someone from surgery to speak with him directly." She held the rifle out horizontally to Dominguez, gripped toward him. "He is not a threat to the staff. He was a terrified father who made a catastrophic decision. I need you to treat him accordingly." Dominguez took the rifle. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the man against the wall, who had stopped saying Tyler's name and had started, quietly and completely without shame, to cry. "Yes, ma'am," Dominguez said, and he meant it. 2:19 a.m. Carla was the first staff member to move. She came down the corridor with the careful speed of someone who needs to reach something urgently, but does not want to spook anything in the process, and she grabbed Avery's arm the moment she was within reach. "Are you okay?" she demanded. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I'm fine," Avery said. "You're fine," Carla repeated, and the words came out with a particular compression, the kind that contains multitudes. "Avery, you just— where did you—" She stopped. She looked at Avery's hands, which were steady. She looked at Avery's face, which was the same face it always was. "What are you?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't entirely a question. It was the sound of a person's understanding of something restructuring itself in real time, like tectonic plates shifting, slow and enormous and irreversible. "I'm a nurse," Avery said. "I need to check on the kids." She pulled her arm gently free and walked down the corridor toward the ward. And behind her, she heard Dominguez speaking quietly into his radio. And she heard Gerald Marsh's crying slowly change timbre. Still grief, but grief moving towards something, hope beginning to thread itself in. And she pushed open the door to the pediatric ward and stepped inside. The ward was awake, not all of it, but enough. Several of the older children had heard the shouting and were sitting up in their beds with the particular alertness of children who have learned that hospitals are places where frightening things happen without warning. 2 of the parents were standing in the center aisle, holding each other's arms, asking the question with their eyes that none of them were ready to ask out loud. Avery walked down the aisle. "Everything is okay," she said. Her voice was quiet and certain, and pitched for the room, not for the hallway. "There was a situation in the corridor. It's been handled. Everyone is safe." "What kind of situation?" one of the parents asked. A woman, early 40s, hair loose from whatever she'd been sleeping in, eyes wide. "A man who needed help," Avery said, simply, accurately. "He's getting it now." She moved to the first bed. 8-year-old Sophia, asthma and a recent pneumonia, sitting up with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. "Hey, Miss Avery," Sophia said, in the careful voice of a child performing bravery. "Hey, Bug," Avery said. She sat on the edge of the bed. "Were you scared?" Sophia considered whether to lie and decided against it. "A little." "That's okay," Avery said. "Being scared is okay. You know what matters? You're safe. I'm right here." She adjusted the rabbit gently in Sophia's grip, making sure the girl's hands were around it properly. "Try to sleep." "Are you going to stay?" Sophia asked. Avery looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. 2 beds down, she heard a small voice say her name. Daniel. She had known he would be awake. He was always awake for the things that happened in the night, as if his particular proximity to the fragile edge of things had given him a sensitivity to disruption that other children his age didn't carry yet. She went to him. He was sitting up straight, and his face showed something more than fear. It showed the specific concern of a child who has decided that his worry is not for himself. "Are you okay?" he asked. She stopped. The question, its direction, the fact that it was pointing at her rather than at himself, arrived somewhere soft and undefended, and she let it, because there was no point pretending it hadn't. "Yeah, bud," she said. "I'm okay." "I heard shouting," he said. "I know. Were you out there?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes." He absorbed this. "Did you fix it?" "It's fixed now," she said. "Everyone is safe." He nodded slowly, with the gravity of someone receiving a report. Then he lay back down. "I knew you would," he said to the ceiling. "I knew it." She turned off his lamp and sat with him until his breathing slowed and deepened into sleep, which took less time than she expected. Because children, the ones who have learned to trust someone, can sleep even in the aftermath of frightening things, when that someone is nearby. She had learned that on a different floor of a different kind of building, a long time ago, in a country she had promised herself she would not think about tonight. She thought about it anyway. 2:34 a.m. The corridor outside the ward was now controlled chaos of a different variety, the kind generated by institutional response rather than individual crisis. More security had arrived. A hospital administrator in a suit that suggested he had driven here from home, rather than been here all night, was speaking into his phone with the expression of someone who is already managing the story before it has finished being a story. 2 police officers had entered through the main elevator and were speaking with Dominguez near the stairwell door. Gerald March had been separated from the scene and was being walked, gently and with what looked like genuine compassion, by a night shift social worker toward the elevator. Carla was waiting outside the ward door. She had been waiting the whole time, Avery realized. She hadn't moved. "They want to talk to you," Carla said. "I know." "The police and the administrator." "I know." Carla searched her face. "Avery, what you did in there, that wasn't—" She stopped, started again. "The way you moved. The way you took that rifle away from him. I've worked in this hospital for 9 years. I have never seen anything like what you just did." She paused. "Who trained you to do that?" Avery was quiet for a moment. In the hallway around them, the machinery of institutional response was fully operational. People moving, voices overlapping, the building asserting its systems and protocols over the rupture that had occurred. She was inside all of it, and somehow outside it at the same time. "The Navy," she said finally. Carla waited. "I wasn't support staff," Avery said. She said it quietly and without particular emphasis, the way you might correct a small factual error in a document that doesn't change the larger meaning. "I was in a special operations unit, rescue and recovery, high-risk extractions." She looked at Carla. "I spent 8 years doing that. And then I stopped. And then I became a nurse." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of understanding arriving, not violently, but with the particular weight of something that explains a great deal all at once. "The standing in doorways," Carla said. "Yes." "The way you eat with your back to the wall." "Yes." "The thing with the combative patient in the ER, 3 weeks in, when everyone thought you just gotten lucky," Avery said. "Yes." Carla let out a long, slow breath. "My God," she said. Not dramatically, just as an honest response to a large thing. "Don't tell anyone," Avery said. "Please." Carla looked at her. "Avery." "Not yet," Avery said. "Please, not yet." Carla held her gaze for a long moment, and what passed between them in that moment was the kind of agreement that doesn't require words to be binding, the kind built on mutual respect between two people who have both seen enough of life to know when something matters and when it needs to be held carefully. "Okay," Carla said. "Okay, not yet." Avery nodded. Then she turned toward the approaching police officer and the administrator in the suit, and she walked toward them with the same quiet steadiness with which she did everything. And behind her, the pediatric ward was silent. And inside it, 20 children were sleeping, and 2 of them were sleeping better than they had in weeks because something in the room had shifted tonight. Something they couldn't name but could feel. The particular warmth of knowing that someone capable of extraordinary things had chosen to be ordinary here, on this floor, in this ward, with them. The police officer, a woman in her 30s, introduced herself as Detective Anna Voss and said without preamble that she had reviewed the corridor security footage on her phone during the elevator ride up. She said this, and then she looked at Avery with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something more personal, something closer to awe that she was working very hard to keep out of her voice. "The disarm," she said. "Where did you learn that specific technique?" "Training," Avery said. "What kind of training?" "The kind I can't discuss in detail," Avery said. And she said it with a courtesy that was genuine and a firmness that was immovable. And Detective Voss, who had spent 15 years reading people for a living, understood immediately that she was not going to get further down this particular road tonight. "The man you apprehended," Voss said, switching direction with the ease of someone experienced in doing so. "Gerald Marsh. His son is in the PICU, post-surgical complication from an appendectomy that developed septic presentation. He has been in the waiting area for 6 hours without an update from the surgical team. Hospital communications broke down." She paused. "He is not a career criminal. He is not a violent offender. He is a 41-year-old electrician from Bellevue whose son was dying while people made him wait in a plastic chair." "I know," Avery said. "You knew that when you approached him." "I figured it out," Avery said, during the conversation. Voss studied her. "You deliberately kept him talking while you moved closer." "Yes. That was extraordinarily dangerous." "Yes," Avery said. "And you did it anyway." "Someone had to." Voss looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Tyler Marsh is alive, for what it's worth. He stabilized 20 minutes ago. The surgical team is with Gerald now." She watched Avery's face absorb this information. "I thought you'd want to know." Something moved in Avery's expression, small and private and gone quickly. "Thank you," she said. 3:01 a.m. The administrator, whose name was Paul Garrett, and who had the particular energy of someone who has arrived at a crisis too late to influence it, but intends to assert ownership of its aftermath, asked Avery to come to his office to provide a formal account. She agreed and walked with him toward the elevator. And in the elevator, he said, carefully, "I've been informed by security that you were the staff member who intervened." "Yes," Avery said, "and that you had prior training that enabled you to do so." "Yes." He looked at the elevator door. "Are you aware that what you did could be considered a significant deviation from hospital protocol regarding hostile intruder situations?" Avery looked at him. "Are you aware that there are 20 children on that floor who are alive right now because of that deviation?" The elevator doors opened. Garrett stepped out first and he didn't answer, because there was no answer for that. Not a professional one, not a human one, except to walk forward and deal with the parts of the night that could still be managed. Behind them, in the elevator's closing doors, the 4th floor returned to its quiet. The corridor was being cleared. The stairwell door was sealed. The ward was asleep. And somewhere in the PICU on the 2nd floor, a 9-year-old boy named Tyler was breathing steadily while his father sat beside him and held his hand and wept the kind of tears that come after terror has passed and gratitude hasn't yet found its words. And on the security monitor in the main booth, the footage from corridor camera 4 was playing on a loop. A small, unremarkable blonde woman in green scrubs, 42 feet of empty hallway. A man with a rifle, and then 7 seconds, just 7 seconds, that had begun, without anyone in the building yet realizing it, to change everything about what anyone at Mercy Heights Medical Center thought they knew about the nurse nobody had wanted. The security footage ran for 7 seconds. Just 7. But by 6 o'clock that morning, it had been watched 43 times by 17 different people inside Mercy Heights Medical Center, and not one of them had said a single word while it was playing. Paul Garrett watched it in his office with the door closed, alone, replaying the moment the rifle barrel dropped and Avery moved. That crossing of distance, that redirect, that controlled, seamless, almost gentle disarmament, and he felt, beneath the administrative concern and the liability calculations and the protocol violations he would need to address, something much simpler and much harder to categorize. He felt the particular unease of a person who has been wrong about something important and is only now beginning to understand how wrong and how long. He pulled Avery's HR file and read it for the first time in full. Not the incident summaries, not the performance flags, the original application, the employment gaps, the military service notation, the single line that read, "Federal government service, 8 years," and nothing else. And then the letters of recommendation, which he had never read because HR had cleared her, and he hadn't thought it necessary, and which were not from nursing supervisors or clinical instructors, but from people whose titles he had to look up. People in positions that were connected to parts of the government that did not publicize their activities or their personnel. He set the file down. He looked at the ceiling. Then he picked up his phone and called Dr. Marcus Brennan. 6:14 a.m. Brennan was already in the hospital. He had come in 40 minutes early after getting the security alert on his phone, and he had spent the intervening time doing exactly what Garrett had done, watching the footage, pulling the report, trying to reconcile what the camera had recorded with the employee file he had been building toward termination. He answered on the first ring. "You've seen the footage," Garrett said. "3 times, Brennan said. "I'm sending you her original application file." "I've already pulled it." A pause. Then Garrett said, "Marcus, did you know anything about her background?" Brennan was quiet for a moment that was not comfortable. "No," he said. "I knew she had military service. I didn't look further." Another pause. "I didn't think I needed to." What he did not say, because he was not yet ready to say it, was that he had spent the last 20 minutes sitting with a weight in his chest that he was struggling to identify. It wasn't guilt, exactly. Or it was guilt, but not the simple kind. Not the kind that comes from a clear mistake clearly made. It was the heavier kind. The kind that comes from realizing that your certainty about something was always a performance, built on incomplete information that you had never questioned, because questioning it would have required a humility you hadn't been willing to extend to a nurse who couldn't document a medication chart correctly. He said none of this to Garrett. He said, "I'll come to your office at 7. Before that, Garrett said, "She's still in the building." She gave her statement to the police, and she went back to the ward. A pause. "She's been there for the last 2 hours, just working, like nothing happened." Brennan said nothing. "I thought you should know that," Garrett said. 6:22 a.m. The pediatric ward at 6 in the morning operates in the particular light of institutional dawn, fluorescent and unromantic, the night shift winding down with the specific exhaustion of people who have been awake for reasons that matter. Carla was finishing her charting at the nurse's station when Brennan stepped off the elevator, and she saw him coming, and something tightened in her jaw that she didn't bother to conceal. "She's in Bay 6, Carla said before he could ask. Her voice was level. "Daniel's morning labs came back, and she's reviewing them with the attending." Brennan looked at her. "How is she?" Carla considered her answer for a moment that was not quite long enough to be rude. "She's exactly the same as she always is," she said, which is something I think you might be finding surprising right now." He didn't respond to that. He walked toward base 6. Through the glass panel in the door, he could see her. She was sitting on the edge of Daniel's bed with a tablet in her hand, and the boy was looking at the screen with the focused attention of a child who has decided that understanding his own medical situation is preferable to being afraid of it. Avery was talking quietly, pointing at something on the screen, and Daniel was nodding, and the attending cardiologist, Whitfield, was standing nearby with an expression that was not the expression of a doctor supervising a nurse. It was the expression of a colleague. Brennan pushed the door open. Both Avery and Whitfield looked up. Daniel looked up too, with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who does not yet know that adults can carry complicated histories with each other into the same room. "Dr. Brennan," Whitfield said, and there was something careful in his voice, a neutrality that was itself a kind of position-taking. Brennan looked at Avery. She looked back at him with the same steadiness she always brought to their interactions, the same absence of deference that he had once interpreted as incompetence and was now, for the first time, reading correctly. It wasn't incompetence. It had never been incompetence. It was the particular composure of someone who had stood in situations so much more dangerous than a department chief's disapproval, that disapproval had simply lost its leverage. "Can I speak with you?" Brennan said. "I'll be done here in 5 minutes," Avery said, and she turned back to Daniel and the tablet and finished what she was doing. 6:31 a.m. They stood in the hallway outside the ward. Brennan had prepared, somewhere in the elevator ride up, a version of what he wanted to say, measured, professional, acknowledging the incident without overinflating it. What came out instead was considerably less organized. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he said. Avery looked at him. "Tell anyone what?" "About your background, your training, what you're capable of." She was quiet for a moment. "Because it wasn't relevant," she said. "I'm a nurse. That's what I'm here to be." "It became relevant last night." "Last night was an exception," she said. "I'm not here to be an exception. I'm here to take care of the kids on this ward." Brennan studied her face and found, for the first time in the months he had known her, that he genuinely did not know what to do with what he was looking at. He had a framework for everything, for competence, for incompetence, for ambition, for mediocrity, and she fit none of them. She had never fit any of them. He had shoved her into the incompetence category because the errors were real, and the errors were documented, and his framework did not have a compartment for someone who was simultaneously filing a medication chart wrong and capable of disarming a man with a rifle in 7 seconds. "The performance review," he said, "the formal process I initiated." "I understand," she said. "I'm suspending it," he said, "pending a full review of your file." Something crossed her face. Not relief, exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been holding a weight for a long time and has just been told they can set it down temporarily and is not yet sure the offer is real. "Okay," she said. "I owe you an apology," Brennan said. The hallway was quiet between them. From somewhere inside the ward, a child made the small, waking up sounds of morning. Breakfast carts were moving somewhere below them, the building shifting into its daytime rhythms. "You don't know what you're apologizing for yet," Avery said. Not unkindly, flatly, accurately. Brennan absorbed this. "No," he said, "I suppose I don't." "Then wait until you do," she said, and she went back inside. 9:47 a.m. The footage had left the building. Nobody could say exactly when or how. These things never had a single moment of origin. But by mid-morning it was circulating in the way things circulate in the age of phones and group chats and the human compulsion to share something extraordinary. A security staff member had mentioned it to a spouse. The spouse had mentioned it to a coworker. Someone had taken a screenshot from the hospital's internal review system that they absolutely should not have taken, and that screenshot had become a grainy but unmistakable image of a small woman in green scrubs standing over a disarmed man in a hospital corridor. And that image had been sent to 12 people, and those 12 people had each sent it to 12 more. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, the phrase Navy SEAL nurse had appeared in 4 separate group chats, 3 of which had nothing to do with anyone connected to Mercy Heights. Patricia Hollis became aware of the situation at 9:52 a.m. when she received a text from a nurse at a different hospital asking if it was true that one of their pediatric nurses had taken down an armed intruder with her bare hands. She stared at the text for a long moment, then walked directly to Garrett's office and knocked on the door without waiting to be invited. "How bad is it?" she asked. Garrett was on the phone. He held up one finger, finished his call, and set the phone down with the deliberate care of someone managing their own stress through the handling of objects. "It's moving," he said. "The image is out. The story is simplified. The way these things always get simplified." "What are they saying?" "Navy SEAL nurse takes down gunman in Children's Hospital." He looked at her. "It's the kind of story that travels fast." Patricia sat down across from him. "Does Avery know?" "Not yet. She's been on the ward all morning." He paused. "She hasn't looked at her phone." "Of course she hasn't," Patricia said. "Patricia," Garrett leaned forward, "what do you know about her? Specifically, what do you actually know that isn't in the file?" Patricia was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough to be a kind of answer in itself. Then she said, "I know she's been carrying something heavy since the day she walked in. I know she chose the pediatric ward on purpose. Not because it was the easiest assignment, but because it was the one that mattered most to her personally. And I know," she stopped, started again. "I know that the night I saw her in the ER with the combative patient, the way she moved, it wasn't a reflex. It was a choice. She chose the minimum necessary force, and then she stepped back." She looked at Garrett. "That takes more discipline than most people in that building have." "More than I have." Garrett was quiet. "She's going to have media at the hospital by this afternoon. Then we need to talk to her before they arrive," Patricia said. She stood up. "And I need to be the one who does it." 10:19 a.m. Avery was in the supply room when Patricia found her, counting inventory on a shelf, with the same methodical attention she brought to everything, her back to the door. Patricia knocked on the open door frame, and Avery turned, and whatever Patricia had prepared to say arranged itself differently the moment she saw Avery's face. Because Avery looked tired. Not the ordinary tired of a night shift. Avery always looked like she had absorbed a night shift and processed it and come out the other side without complaint. But something deeper. The kind of tired that lives below the surface of a person and only shows when enough layers have been stripped away. "Sit down," Patricia said. Avery sat down on the supply room step stool, which was not an elegant piece of furniture for an important conversation. But Patricia had learned long ago that important conversations happen wherever they happen. She pulled over the rolling stool from the corner and sat across from her. "The footage is out," Patricia said. "It's online. Your image is circulating. By this afternoon, people are going to know your name." Avery absorbed this without visible reaction. Then she said, quietly, "How many people?" "Enough that it won't stay contained," Patricia said. "I'm sorry, we tried to hold it, but..." She stopped. "I'm sorry, Avery." Avery looked at the shelf in front of her. She was still for a long time, not frozen, not shut down, but the particular stillness of someone working through something very quickly inside a very small space. "Okay," she said finally. "Is there anything you want to tell me?" Patricia asked. "Anything you want me to know before this becomes a story that other people are telling?" The supply room was quiet. From the ward outside, muffled and ordinary, the sounds of morning routine continued. Call buttons, footsteps, a child's voice asking for something with the particular persistence of a child who has mastered the art of the repeated request. "I was in Naval Special Warfare," Avery said. "SEAL team attached to a hostage rescue unit. I did that for 8 years." She said it the way you might read a resume out loud. factual, without texture. My last deployment was in the Middle East. We were extracting a group of kidnapped children from a compound that had been held for 11 days. She paused. We got the kids out, all of them. Another pause. We didn't all come home. Patricia did not speak. She understood, in the way that certain people understand certain things, without being told the details, that what she was hearing was the weight Avery had been carrying since the day she walked through the hospital doors. She understood that the pediatric ward was not a career choice. It was a continuation, an act of reparation or devotion or both, directed at children who would never know what had been sacrificed on behalf of children who look like them. Their names were Sergeant David Cho and Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, Avery said. David had a daughter. She was 3. Marcus was going to get married in June. She looked at Patricia. I've never said their names out loud in this building before. Patricia reached across the space between them and put her hand over Avery's, and she held it there, and she didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that would not diminish it. After a moment, Avery said, I didn't come here to be a hero. I came here to be a nurse. I came here because taking care of kids was the only thing that made any kind of sense after everything. You are a nurse, Patricia said firmly. Whatever else you are, whatever else happened, you are a nurse, and a good one. I should have said that more clearly and more often. Avery looked at her. You're saying it now, she said. 11:03 a.m. The first news van arrived outside Mercy Heights at 11:15. Patricia had been warned by hospital communications and had positioned herself at the main entrance to manage the access requests that were already coming in, and she handled them with the particular efficiency of a charge nurse who has been managing chaos long enough to do it without raising her voice. Inside, in the pediatric ward, the day shift was operational, and Avery was still there. Technically off duty since 7 that morning, but present nonetheless, doing the things that she did when she was present, which were the same things she always did. She was sitting with a 12-year-old named Marcus. Named Marcus, she had noticed on his first day and had not said anything about, who had been admitted for a bone marrow biopsy and was undergoing the specific misery of waiting, which is its own variety of suffering and one that children handle less well than pain, because pain at least has a shape. You're thinking too loud, Avery told him. Marcus looked at her with the sullen assessment of a 12-year-old who has been found out. How do you know what I'm thinking? Because it's the same thing everyone thinks in here, she said. When is this going to be over? He was quiet. Then, is it going to hurt? Yes, she said. I won't lie to you about that. It'll hurt. But it's going to be fast, and it'll be done, and then it won't hurt anymore. She looked at him. You know what I've found about pain? What? It always ends, she said, every single time. It feels like it won't, but it does. He looked at her with the evaluating look of a child deciding whether an adult is feeding them a comfortable lie or an actual truth. He decided she meant it. Okay, he said. She stayed with him until the procedure team came, and she held his hand during the part that hurt, and she was still there when it was over, and she didn't make a big thing of any of it, because that was how she did things. Outside his room, Carla was waiting with her arms crossed, and her expression carrying the specific mixture of respect and exasperation that she had been carrying since approximately 2:17 that morning. There are reporters outside the building, she said. I know, Avery said. They're asking for you by name. I know. Are you going to talk to them? No, Avery said. Carla looked at her for a moment. Can I ask you something? You're going to anyway. Last night, Carla said, when you were moving toward him, when you were getting closer while you were talking to him. She stopped. Were you scared? Avery considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Yes, she said, but scared is just information. It tells you what you're dealing with. It doesn't have to tell you what to do. Carla stared at her. Where did you get that from? Someone told me that a long time ago, Avery said. Someone I trusted. She didn't say who. Carla didn't ask. Some things you leave in the space between people, where they can carry their own weight without being pressed into words. 12:34 p.m. The twist that broke the story open arrived not from a journalist or a hospital administrator, but from a veterans organization in Tacoma that had, through channels Avery could not have predicted and would not have chosen, confirmed her identity and partial service record through a source connected to Naval Special Warfare Command. It was not a classified disclosure. Her service itself was not classified, only the operational details. But it was specific enough to be real, and real enough to change the story from a rumor into a verified fact. And a verified fact in the age of the internet becomes something that moves faster than any individual can manage. By 1 o'clock, her name was attached to a confirmed Navy SEAL background in a pediatric ward in Seattle. By 1:30, the veterans community, a network that was vast and immediate and carried the particular loyalty of people who have shared extreme experience, was spreading the story with the specific pride that community takes in its own. By 2 o'clock, the hospital's switchboard had logged over 200 calls from media outlets, veterans groups, parents, and people who simply wanted to say that they had heard the story and it had mattered to them. Patricia fielded all of it from the entrance, with Garrett standing slightly behind her in the universal posture of institutional management. Inside, she had made one decision that she had not asked Garrett's permission for. She had taken Avery's badge off the duty roster and marked her as unavailable, which was a charge nurse's prerogative in which she exercised with the complete conviction of someone who is correct. But Avery found out anyway. She found out through Daniel, of all people. Through Daniel, who had a tablet and who had been using it that afternoon, not for the learning games his occupational therapist had loaded onto it, but for the particular curiosity of a 7-year-old who had been in a hospital for 11 weeks and had developed a precocious relationship with the internet as a result. "Ms. Avery," he said, when she came in for his afternoon vitals. His voice had the careful, significant quality of someone holding important information. "Hey, bud," she said. "You're on the internet," he said. She stopped. "What?" He turned the tablet toward her. She looked at the screen. She looked at it for a long moment, at her own name, at the grainy image that had escaped the hospital's security system, at the words that had been assembled around both, into a story that was accurate in its facts and completely inadequate to everything it was describing. She handed the tablet back to him. "Where did you find that?" "I was looking up stuff about Navy SEALs," he said. He looked at her with his grave, 7-year-old gravity. "Because of what you said about being in the Navy." She sat down. "Daniel, you saved those kids," he said. "The ones in the story, the ones that got taken." She was quiet. "And then you came here," he said, "and you saved me every night. You check on me when I can't sleep." He looked at her with the absolute directness of a child who has not yet learned to protect people from what he thinks. "You've been a hero this whole time. I knew it. I told you I knew it." She looked at him. Her face was, for the first time that anyone in the hospital had seen, for the first time since she had walked through the doors 3 months earlier and gotten lost in the hallway and thanked an orderly so softly he hadn't heard, her face was not still. Something in it had moved, something genuine and unguarded and entirely her own. "I'm just trying to be a nurse, bud," she said. Her voice was not quite as level as usual. "You can be both," Daniel said, with the simple confidence of someone who has not yet learned that the world tells people they have to choose. "Why can't you be both?" She didn't answer immediately. She took his vitals with careful hands and wrote the numbers down accurately and double-checked them. And she adjusted his blanket, and she turned off the overhead light because the afternoon sun was coming in at an angle that he found uncomfortable. And she did all of these things with the same quiet attention she always brought to him. And then she sat back down. "Someone told me once," she said, that the best operators are the ones who are always thinking about what comes next. Not the threat, not the moment. What comes next? She looked at her hands. I think I've been so focused on getting through each shift, each day, each night that I stopped thinking about what comes next. Daniel considered this. What do you want to come next? She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, I want to stay here. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep taking care of you and the other kids. She paused. I just don't know if the hospital will let me now. Daniel's face shifted with the particular seriousness of a child receiving information that alarms him. Why wouldn't they let you stay? Because I did something last night that wasn't in my job description, she said. You saved everybody, he said. That's not always how it works, she said gently. He thought about this. Then he said, with the decision-making finality that she had come to recognize as his particular superpower, then we'll make them let you stay. She almost smiled. And how are we going to do that? He picked up his tablet. I have the internet, he said. And this time she did smile. The slow one, the real one, the one that took its time arriving and stayed when it got there. She shook her head and she told him that he absolutely was not going to post anything on the internet on her behalf, and he argued with the respectful persistence of a child who believes his position is correct. And she let him argue for a while because the arguing was genuine and it was good. And it was, she realized, the first argument she had allowed herself to enjoy in a very long time. Outside the room, through the glass panel, Carla watched them and did not go in. She had learned in the months of watching Avery Kaine when to leave a thing alone and when to tend to it. This was a thing that did not need tending. This was a thing that was tending itself. She went back to her station and she pulled up the afternoon chart assignments and she did her job. And inside the room, the nurse that nobody had wanted sat with the boy who had needed her. And they argued about the internet and the particular ethics of 7-year-olds going viral on behalf of adults who hadn't asked them to. And for those few minutes, those ordinary, irreplaceable, uncomplicated minutes, neither one of them was in any kind of danger at all. Daniel did not post anything on the internet that afternoon, but someone else did. It wasn't a journalist. It wasn't a hospital employee breaking protocol. It was a man named Gerald Marsh, sitting in the PICU waiting area on the second floor with his son's hand in his, typing on his phone with the one-fingered deliberateness of someone who does not consider himself a person who posts things online, but has decided, in this particular instance, that staying silent would be a kind of dishonesty he couldn't live with. He wrote 3 paragraphs. He did not use Avery's last name. He wrote only that a nurse on the 4th floor had talked him down from the worst moment of his life, that she had stood between him and 20 sleeping children without a weapon or backup or any protection except whatever she was made of, and that his son Tyler was breathing steadily in the bed beside him, and that he, Gerald Marsh, had no words adequate to what that meant. He ended with, I don't know her full story, but I know what she did, and I know it saved my son's life tonight, along with everyone else on that floor. Whoever she is the reason I get to hold my kid's hand right now. He posted it at 2:47 p.m. and went back to watching Tyler sleep. By 4 o'clock, it had been shared 11,000 times. 3:18 p.m. Patricia found out about Gerald's post from the hospital's communications director, who called her with the particular tone of someone delivering news they have categorized as both good and complicated. It's sympathetic, the director said. It frames her well, but it's going to accelerate everything. Everything is already accelerating, Patricia said. She was standing at the window of her office, watching the news van that had been joined, since noon, by 2 more news vans, and the growing cluster of people on the sidewalk outside the hospital entrance who had arrived for reasons she was still working to understand. Some were journalists. Some appeared to be veterans. She could tell by the way they carried themselves, the same quality she had learned to recognize in Avery, that particular uprightness that was not posture so much as a kind of alertness that never fully left. And some were parents. Parents from the pediatric ward, parents who had been in the building last night, parents who had heard what happened and had simply come back to stand outside the place where their children were being kept safe. "What do we do?" the director asked. "We let her decide," Patricia said, and she ended the call. She walked to the pediatric ward and found Carla at the nurse's station and said, without preamble, "Where is she?" "Break room," Carla said. "She's been in there for 20 minutes. I think she's finally sleeping." Patricia stopped. "Don't wake her up," she said. "I wasn't going to," Carla said. Patricia stood at the break room door for a moment, her hand not quite on the handle, and she thought about what it cost a person to do what Avery Kaine had done, not last night, but every night before it. Every shift of absorbing Brennan's contempt and the staff's whispers and the institutional weight of being considered the weakest person in the building, all while carrying a history that made every one of those judgments almost cosmically absurd. She thought about what it took to endure that quietly, without argument, without the relief of letting anyone know what you actually were. She took her hand off the door and went back to her office. 3:52 p.m. Avery woke up at 3:49, alone in the break room, in the chair in the corner with her back to the wall. She had not intended to sleep. She had sat down for 5 minutes and her body, which had been running on the residual chemistry of crisis response, and was now past the point where willpower could override biology, had simply taken what it needed. She woke the way she always woke, instantly, fully, without the transitional fog that most people move through between sleep and consciousness. It was a quality that had served her well in 8 years of operational service and served her poorly in normal life, because normal life, she had discovered, expected you to ease into wakefulness rather than arrive in it like someone stepping through a door. She checked her phone. 47 missed calls. 11 text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. One from Carla that said, "Don't look at your phone." One from a number she did recognize, a number she had not called in 8 months, stored in her contacts under a single initial, R. The message from R said, "I heard, you okay?" She stared at it for a moment. Then she typed back, "Yes," and set the phone face down on the table. R was Commander Rachel Torres, her former team leader, the person who had been standing to her left when everything fell apart on that compound in the Middle East, the person who had made the call to extract when the structure began to collapse, the person who had pulled Avery's arm hard enough to leave a bruise that lasted 2 weeks, and who was the reason Avery was alive to be a nurse in Seattle instead of one of the 2 names she had said out loud to Patricia that morning for the first time. She and Rachel had not spoken regularly since Avery's discharge, not out of hostility, out of the particular silence that sometimes grows between people who share an experience so extreme that ordinary conversation feels inadequate, and the silence becomes easier than the inadequacy. The phone buzzed. Rachel again. "I heard about the disarm. That was clean work." Avery looked at the message. Then, despite everything, she felt something move in her chest that was not grief and not pride, but something adjacent to both. The recognition of being seen by someone who understood the language of what she'd done. Not the civilian version of it, but the actual version, the trained, deliberate, disciplined version. She typed, "I've been a nurse for 3 months and I can't get the paperwork right." Rachel's response came back in 40 seconds. "You never could get the paperwork right. You were the best operator on the team and the worst at filing reports. Some things don't change." Avery read it twice. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stood up and went back to work. 4:17 p.m. The meeting Garrett had been arranging since morning finally happened at 4:15 in the hospital's third-floor conference room. And it was not the meeting Avery had been expecting. She had been expecting a review, a formal process, the kind of institutional response that fills silences with procedure and manages human complexity through documentation. What she walked into instead was a room that contained Garrett, Patricia, Brennan, Dr. Whitfield, Detective Anna Voss from the previous night, and a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Commander Dale Hartley and who was connected to Naval Special Warfare Command in a capacity he described as liaison, in which Avery understood immediately to mean something more specific and less public than that. She stood at the doorway for a moment, reading the room the way she read every room. Exits, positions, postures, the particular arrangement of people who had come together with different purposes and different stakes, and were now waiting to see how those purposes would negotiate each other. She sat down. "Miss Kaine," Garrett began. "Avery," she said, "please." Garrett nodded. "Avery, I want to start by saying, on behalf of this hospital's administration, that what you did last night was extraordinary. And I want to say, also on behalf of this administration, that the way this hospital has treated you since your first day here has not reflected the institution I want this to be." He stopped. The room was quiet. "I appreciate that," Avery said, "but I'd like to know why Commander Hartley is here." Hartley, who had the particular quality of a person accustomed to rooms where his presence required no explanation, allowed a small acknowledgement of her directness to cross his face. "Your service record became partially public this afternoon through a veterans organization," he said. "Naval Special Warfare Command is aware. We wanted to ensure that the information being circulated is accurate and that your interests are protected." "My interests," Avery said. "Your privacy," Hartley said. "Your operational details remain classified. Your identity and general service history do not." He looked at her steadily. "There are people in the veterans community who want to speak publicly about this, about you. We can facilitate or suppress depending on your preference." "Suppress?" Brennan said from the corner of the table. Everyone looked at him. He had been quiet since Avery sat down, sitting with his hands flat on the table, in the position of a man who has decided to listen before he speaks, which was, for Brennan, a significant departure from his standard operating procedure. "Why would we suppress it?" "Because it's her story," Patricia said. She said it without heat, but with absolute finality. "It belongs to her." Avery looked at Patricia, then at Hartley, then at the table in front of her, where her hands were folded in the way they were always folded, still, precise, giving nothing away. "What happens if it comes out fully?" she asked. "What happens to the people still serving, to the mission details?" "The mission details stay protected," Hartley said. "Your participation in the unit, the general nature of the work, the timeline, none of that is classified. The names of those you served with who are still active, that stays protected." "And David and Marcus," she said. Their names in this room, in front of these people, felt different than they had in the supply room with Patricia. Weightier, more exposed. "Sergeant David Cho and Petty Officer Marcus Webb are on record as having died in service," Hartley said, and he said it with the careful respect of someone handling something irreplaceable. "Their families have been informed. What you share about them is your choice." The room was very still. Avery was quiet for a long time, long enough that Brennan shifted in his seat and Whitfield looked at his hands, and Garrett poured water that he didn't drink. Then she said, "I came here to be a nurse. I didn't come here to be a story." "I understand that," Hartley said. "But it's already a story," Voss said. She had been silent in the corner since Avery arrived, and her voice now was not unkind, just precise, the voice of someone dealing in facts. "Gerald Marsh's post has been shared over 15,000 times in the last hour. Your name is already attached. The story is already out. The question isn't whether it exists. The question is whether you shape it or it shapes you." Avery looked at her. "That's good," she said. "Did you prepare that?" Voss almost smiled. "A little," she admitted. The tension in the room moved, not disappearing but changing quality. The way the air in a room changes when a window opens. Garrett refilled his water glass. Whitfield unclenched his hands. "What I want," Avery said, "is to keep working here, on this ward, with these patients." She looked at Garrett. "Everything else, the footage, the story, the media outside, I don't care about any of that. I care about Daniel's morning labs and Sophia's asthma protocol and Marcus's biopsy results and whether the kid in Bay 12 is going to be able to go home by Friday." She paused. "That's what I care about." Garrett looked at her for a long moment. Then he said simply, "Your position is secure. Effective immediately, the performance review is closed." Brennan cleared his throat. Every head turned toward him. He had the expression of a man crossing a bridge he has burned behind himself, which meant there was no going back, and he knew it and had decided anyway. "I want to say something," he said. He looked at Avery. "I made a decision about you before I understood what I was looking at. I was wrong. That's not—" He stopped, started again. "I've been wrong before. I don't enjoy it, but I've been wrong, and this was one of those times, and I want to say it directly to you." Avery looked at him across the table. She did not perform forgiveness. She did not offer him the comfortable absolution of a gracious response. She simply looked at him with the steadiness that had always disconcerted him and said, "I know." And then, "Thank you for saying it." It wasn't everything, but it was real. And real was what she had always traded in. 5:03 p.m. The twist that nobody in that conference room had seen coming arrived at 5 o'clock in the form of a woman named Linda Cho. Patricia took the call at the nurse's station. The woman identified herself quietly, and Patricia stood up very straight and said, "Please hold," and walked to the conference room door and knocked with a firmness that brought the meeting to an immediate halt. She opened the door and looked at Avery and said, "There's a call for you. It's—" She stopped, took a breath. "It's David Cho's wife." The room went completely silent. Avery stood up slowly. Her face had changed in a way that was not dramatic. It was the same face it always was. Same eyes, same still expression. But something behind it had shifted. The way a light source moves and the shadows in a room rearrange themselves without the room itself changing. She walked to the door and took the phone from Patricia and stepped into the hallway and closed the conference room door behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she put it to her ear. "Linda," she said. The voice on the other end was soft, composed. The composure of someone who had long ago made their peace with grief, not because it was gone, but because they had learned to carry it without putting it down. "Avery," Linda Cho said, "I heard what happened last night. How did you—" "Veterans Network," Linda said. "Someone recognized your description and connected it to David's unit." A pause. "I've been following it all day." Avery leaned against the corridor wall. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds and opened them. "Linda, I'm sorry. I should have called you. I should have called you a long time ago. I just—" "Avery," Linda said, gently, firmly, "I'm not calling because I'm angry. I want you to know that. I'm calling because—" Her voice shifted slightly, carrying something careful and private. "My daughter came home from school today and she saw the story on her tablet. She's 9 now. She saw your name and she recognized it because David used to say it. He talked about you. He said—" A pause that had the weight of something precious being set down carefully. "He said you were the best he'd ever served alongside. He said that more than once." Avery's hand tightened on the phone. She said nothing because she did not trust her voice in that moment. "She asked me," Linda continued, "if the nurse in the story was the same Avery who worked with her dad. And I said yes. And she said—" Linda stopped. When she continued, her voice was thinner, working against something. She said, "Does she know that she's still protecting people? Does she know that Daddy would be proud of her?" The hallway of the pediatric ward at Mercy Heights Medical Center was not a place that generally witnessed the particular variety of silence that followed those words. It was a place of motion and noise and the ongoing managed urgency of medical care. But in the 30 seconds after Linda Cho said what she said, it was very, very quiet. "She's 9, Avery said finally. Her voice was not quite steady. "She's exactly the same age as Tyler." "I know," Linda said. "I know. Tell her—" Avery stopped. She stood in the hallway where 20 children were being kept alive by the work of people who had chosen this floor and this work and these kids. And she thought about David Cho, who had a daughter who was 9 years old and who had died 11 days before that daughter turned 2. And she thought about the compound and the children and the walls coming down and Marcus Webb shouting her name in the dark. She thought about all of it, and she let herself think about it. Because Patricia was right, you couldn't set it down, you could only carry it forward. And carrying it forward was what she had been doing in this building every night for 3 months, without knowing that was what it was called. "Tell her that her dad saved those children," Avery said. "Tell her that every kid I take care of here is something he made possible. Tell her that every single night, a sound on the other end of the phone that was not quite a word, then, 'I will, I promise.'" "And Linda," Avery's voice steadied, "I should have called. I will call. I mean that." "I know you mean it," Linda said. "I've always known when you mean something." They stayed on the line together for a moment longer. 2 women connected by a grief that was also, in its way, a kind of love. And then they said goodbye, and Avery ended the call and stood in the hallway with the phone in her hand and her eyes focused on the middle distance. On nothing in particular, on everything at once. Behind her, the conference room door opened. It was Carla, who had no business being in that conference room and who had been in it anyway because Carla Mendez had decided, sometime around 2:17 that morning, that Avery Kaine was her responsibility in a way that transcended job titles and union agreements. Carla came and stood beside her and looked at her profile and said nothing at all, which was the correct thing. After a moment, Avery said, "His daughter is 9. "David Cho's daughter?" "Yes." Carla absorbed this. "Same age as Tyler Marsh," she said. "Yes," Avery said. "I know." Another silence. Then Carla said, "You're thinking about that." "I'm always thinking about that," Avery said. "That's why I'm here." 6:28 p.m. The evening shift change brought the particular energy of information moving through a community, the day staff briefing the night staff, the story traveling in both directions, being told and heard and held differently by different people, depending on what they already knew about Avery Kaine and what they were only now learning. Nurses who had mocked her sat with that fact quietly. Residents who had corrected her on procedures she had performed correctly 1,000 times in conditions they had never imagined found themselves reviewing those memories with a new and uncomfortable lens. The ER staff who had whispered for months about the hiring mistake on the 4th floor moved through their shift with the subdued quality of people processing a significant recalibration. Brennan moved through the ER with it too, though his version was more internal and more thorough than most. He was a man who did not arrive at conclusions quickly, but who, once arrived, held them completely, and the conclusion he was working toward this evening, working toward it through his rounds and his patient reviews and his administrative obligations, was large enough to require the full span of the evening to reach. He reached it at 6:40, standing at the ER nurses station, reviewing a chart that he was not really reading. He set the chart down. He said to nobody in particular, "I've been practicing medicine for 16 years. The junior resident standing nearby looked up, uncertain whether she was being addressed. "In 16 years, Brennan continued, I have never once considered the possibility that the most important person in this hospital might be working a night shift on the pediatric ward for $32 an hour. He picked the chart back up. "That's a failure of institutional imagination," he said, "and it's mine." The resident stared at him. "Dr. Brennan?" "Keep working," he said, and he went back to his rounds. 7:14 p.m. Avery had gone home at 6, Patricia had physically walked her to the elevator and stood there until the doors closed. An act of managerial authority that Avery had accepted with the quiet grace of someone who knows when to yield. And she was in her apartment when the second twist arrived. The one that changed everything about what came next in a way that nobody had anticipated, including Avery herself. The call came from a blocked number. She almost didn't answer. She answered on the fourth ring. Avery Kaine? The voice was a woman's, professional, measured, carrying the particular weight of institutional authority. Yes, my name is Dr. Susan Park. I'm the medical director of the Pediatric Trauma Response Initiative at Seattle Children's Hospital. A pause. I've been watching your situation today with a great deal of interest. Another pause, this one carrying something that was not the measured tone of an opening, but the more careful tone of someone about to say a thing they have thought about for a long time. I run a program that trains hospital personnel in crisis response and conflict de-escalation for pediatric settings. We have federal funding and academic partnership with the University of Washington. We've been looking for a clinical director for 18 months. She stopped. I would like to meet with you at your convenience, this week if possible. Avery sat very still in her apartment. I'm a nurse, she said, not a director. You are a nurse with 8 years of special operations experience in hostage rescue and pediatric protection, Dr. Park said, and you spent last night demonstrating, in a real-time active threat situation, exactly the kind of de-escalation discipline we have been trying to teach. A pause. You're exactly what we're looking for, Miss Kaine. You're possibly exactly what this field has been looking for. Avery looked at the wall across from her chair. The wall was empty. She had not hung anything on it since moving in, a habit from deployments where personalization of a space was an investment you couldn't always afford to cash out. What would the role involve, she asked. Training hospital nursing staff, building protocols, applying your specific experience to a civilian medical context in a way that could be replicated across the country. Dr. Park's voice was careful and deliberate and entirely serious. What you did last night, the restraint you showed, the de-escalation before the physical intervention, the way you prioritize the patient's underlying emotional crisis, that is exactly the framework we want to build a national training program around. Avery was quiet. I know this is a great deal to process, Dr. Park said. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. I'm asking for a meeting. I'll meet with you, Avery said. Her voice was steady and immediate and carried the particular quality of a decision made not in this moment, but in some earlier moment that this conversation had simply arrived at. Thursday morning, wherever works for you. Thursday morning, Dr. Park said, and something in her voice shifted. Not quite relief, but its professional equivalent. The sound of a long search that has finally come to the right address. Thank you, Miss Kaine. After the call ended, Avery sat in her apartment for a long time with the phone in her lap. She thought about Daniel asking, why can't you be both? She thought about Linda Cho's daughter, 9 years old, asking her mother whether her father would be proud. She thought about Gerald Marsh sitting in the PICU, holding Tyler's hand, and typing 3 paragraphs that had been shared 15,000 times. She thought about David and Marcus, and the compound, and the children, and the particular weight of survival. Not the guilt of it, not tonight, but the responsibility of it. The obligation that survival carries when it has been purchased at a price you did not pay alone. She thought about what it might mean to take everything she had been, every mission, every extraction, every child carried out of darkness, and build something from it that could be given to other people. Something that could travel further than she could go alone. She sat with this for a long time. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, and made herself something to eat for the first time in 22 hours, because she had learned a long time ago that you could not carry anything, grief or mission or purpose, on an empty stomach. 8:49 p.m. Back at Mercy Heights, the pediatric ward ran its evening routine under Carla's supervision. Vitals were taken, medications were administered, lights were turned down one by one as the ward settled into its nighttime rhythm. In Bay 6, Daniel was awake longer than usual. Carla had checked on him twice and found him sitting up, tablet in hand, not looking at the internet as he had promised, just holding it. On the third check, she sat down on the edge of his bed and said, "You okay, bud?" He looked at her with his grave, 7-year-old gravity. "Is she coming back tomorrow?" "Avery?" Carla said. "Yes, she'll be here tomorrow night." He nodded slowly, processing this the way he processed everything, fully, without shortcuts. "Good," he said. "She needs to be here." "I think so too," Carla said. He put the tablet down and lay back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "She thinks she's just a nurse." Carla looked at him. "What do you think she is?" He considered this with the seriousness of a child who has been given a real question and intends to give it a real answer. "She's the person who stays," he said. "When everything's scary and everyone else is scared, she stays. That's what she is." Carla looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Yeah, that's exactly what she is." She turned off his lamp and checked his monitor and walked back to the nurse's station and sat down. And she wrote in her personal notes, not the official chart, the small notebook she kept in her scrubs pocket, where she sometimes wrote things that mattered. She wrote, "The person who stays," and underlined it twice. Outside the hospital, the news vans were still there. The cluster of people on the sidewalk had grown rather than shrunk. And in the growing dark, they stood together quietly, some of them veterans, some of them parents, some of them simply people who had read the story and felt something pull in them toward this building and this floor and the woman inside it who had done an extraordinary thing and then gone back to work. They did not call out or make noise. They simply stood, holding something between them that did not have a precise name, but felt in the way that important things feel before language catches up to them, a great deal like gratitude. Avery slept 6 hours that night, which was 2 more than usual, and woke at 5 in the morning with the particular clarity of someone whose body has decided, without consultation, that it is done pretending to need more rest than it is getting. She lay still for a moment in the dark of her apartment and listened to the city outside. Traffic already building, a siren somewhere distant, the low ambient hum of Seattle, doing what cities do at 5 in the morning, which is begin again without ceremony. She thought about Dr. Park's call. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Daniel and Linda Cho's daughter, and the word that Carla had not said out loud, but that had been present in every conversation of the past 24 hours, like a frequency underneath the audible range. Purpose. The word was purpose. And it had been so long since she had felt it as something forward-facing rather than backward compensating that she was not entirely sure, lying in the dark at 5 in the morning, what to do with it. She got up. She made coffee. She sat with it at the kitchen table, and she called Rachel Torres. Rachel answered on the second ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she had been thinking about Avery too. "You're up early," Rachel said. "I got a call last night," Avery said, "from a woman at Seattle Children's. She runs a federal program, crisis response training for pediatric hospital staff." She paused. "She wants me to be the clinical director." Silence on the line. Then Rachel said, "Tell me everything." So Avery did. She told her about Dr. Park and the federal funding and the University of Washington partnership and the National Training Program framework. And Rachel listened without interrupting, which was not her default mode, and which told Avery that Rachel understood this was important before Avery had finished explaining why. When Avery was done, Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Are you going to take it?" "I don't know yet," Avery said. "I haven't met with her. I don't know the full scope." "But you're considering it," Rachel said, not a question. "I'm considering it," Avery confirmed. Another silence, this one different in texture, the kind that contains something being decided. Avery, Rachel said, can I tell you something? As your former team leader and as someone who has been worried about you for 2 years, go ahead. You have been treating your own survival as a debt, Rachel said, since the day you got out. I've watched you do it. You went into nursing because it was the closest thing to the work you could do without carrying a weapon, without being what you were. And that was the right call. I think that was exactly the right call. She paused. But this thing Dr. Park is describing, that's not debt repayment. That's forward. That's building something. And I think you've been so focused on paying what you owe to the past that you haven't let yourself look at what you could build going forward. Avery held her coffee cup. It had gone slightly cold. She looked at it. David would have been terrible at a desk job, she said. Rachel laughed, a real one, short and genuine. He absolutely would have hated it. Marcus would have been good at it, Avery said. He always wanted to teach. After he got out, he talked about... She stopped, held the pause. He talked about teaching young guys, passing it on. I know, Rachel said, softly. I know he did. Maybe this is that, Avery said. Maybe this is the version of that. Maybe it is, Rachel said, and she let the silence hold it, because some things are better held in silence than pressed into more words. They stayed on the line together for a few more minutes, talking about smaller things, Rachel's current assignment, mutual people they had served with, the unremarkable logistics of two people reconnecting after a silence too long. When they ended the call, Avery sat at the kitchen table with her cold coffee and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the space in front of her had more in it than the space behind. 7:22 a.m. She arrived at Mercy Heights 40 minutes before her shift started, which was not unusual for her, though this morning the reason was different. She had come early because of something she needed to do before the ward woke up fully, before the day staff handed off to her, before the rhythm of the floor absorbed her back into its current. She came early because she needed to see Daniel. He was awake when she pushed the door open. Awake and sitting up and holding a piece of paper with both hands and the expression of someone guarding something important. When he saw her, the expression shifted into something that was trying to be casual and failing completely. You're early, he said. I know, she said. She sat in the chair beside his bed. What's that? He hesitated. Then he held the paper out. It was a drawing, not the superhero drawing from before. This one was different, more deliberate. He had drawn two figures side by side, a tall one in scrubs and a small one in a hospital gown. The tall figure had something in her hands that he had drawn carefully enough that she could tell it was meant to be a stethoscope. And around both figures he had drawn, with the kind of artistic commitment that only a 7-year-old with strong feelings can sustain, a large circle. Not a cage, not a border, a shield. That's us, he said. You're protecting me, but I'm protecting you too. He pointed at the circle. That's how it works. You protect the people and then they protect you back. Avery looked at the drawing for a long moment. She turned it over in her hands carefully, treating it with the attention you give to documents that cannot be replaced. Where did you learn that? She asked. You, he said, simply, without any awareness that it was the most important thing he had said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with his grave, clear, entirely serious eyes, and she thought about all the things that she had learned in 8 years of special operations, about threat assessment and tactical movement and the geometry of violence. And she thought about how none of that, not a single piece of it, had prepared her for a 7-year-old boy in a hospital gown, drawing a shield around both of them like it was obvious, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Thank you, Bud, she said. Her voice was steady. You can keep it, he said, like he was doing her a favor. She folded it carefully and put it in her scrubs pocket, next to the first drawing he had given her. And something settled in her chest that had been slightly unmoored since 2:17 the previous morning. 8:03 a.m. The twist nobody saw coming walked through the pediatric ward doors at 8 o'clock precisely, and his name was Tyler Marsh. He was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to still be in the PICU on the second floor, recovering from the septic complication that had nearly killed him 2 nights ago. But Tyler Marsh had apparently decided that the PICU was finished with him before the PICU had finished its paperwork, and his father Gerald, who had spent 48 hours learning what gratitude felt like when it lives in your body instead of just your head, had somehow convinced the step-down team to allow a supervised 10-minute transfer for therapeutic visitation, which was a real thing that existed in the hospital's protocol, and which Gerald had researched at 2 in the morning on his phone, like the determined, thorough man he was. Tyler was 9 years old and small for it, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body had recently been through something serious and was still accounting for the aftermath. He was holding his father's hand. Gerald was holding on the way parents hold on after a close thing, not tightly enough to alarm, tightly enough to know. Carla, who was at the nurse's station when they arrived, stared at them for a moment. Then she went and got Avery. Avery came out of Bay 6 and stopped when she saw them. Gerald looked at her across the ward corridor, and whatever he had prepared to say, he had been preparing something since the moment he had typed those 3 paragraphs on his phone, appeared to leave him completely. He simply looked at her. His jaw worked once. He didn't speak. Tyler did. Tyler looked up at the small blonde nurse with the direct, evaluating gaze of a 9-year-old who has been told a specific thing about a specific person and is now verifying it against reality. "Are you the one who helped my dad?" he asked. "Your dad helped himself," Avery said. "He made a hard choice." Tyler considered this with the same careful thoroughness that she had come to associate in the last 24 hours with 9-year-old children of extraordinary people. "He said you stood in front of everyone," Tyler said, "so he would stop." "Something like that," Avery said. Tyler looked at her for another moment. Then he said, "Thank you for not letting my dad do something he couldn't take back." The ward was quiet. Carla, standing 6 feet away, did not move. Gerald made a sound that was not quite a word, and Avery looked at this 9-year-old boy who was alive because she had stood in a hallway at 2:17 in the morning and chosen to walk toward rather than away. And she felt the full weight of that choice arrive in her body in a way it had not been able to arrive while she was still inside the crisis. Clean and clear and completely worth carrying. "You're welcome," she said. "Take care of your dad, okay? He needs it." Tyler nodded like this was a serious assignment he was accepting. "I know," he said. "I've been telling him that." Gerald laughed, and it was the unguarded laugh of a man who has been to the edge and come back and found on the other side his kid making him laugh. He reached out and shook Avery's hand, both hands holding hers in both of his, and he said, "I don't have words." "You had plenty of words on the internet," she said. He blinked, then laughed again. "Yeah," he said, "I did. I'm sorry if that caused—" "Don't be sorry," she said. She looked at Tyler. "It gave your son something to be proud of." Tyler stood straighter at that, visibly, like someone had adjusted his spine from the inside. They stayed 5 minutes and left, Gerald walking Tyler back toward the elevator with the particular, careful attention of a father who is still learning to take nothing for granted. And Avery watched them go and then turned around and went back to work, because that was what you did. You held the important things for the time they needed holding, and then you went back to work. 10:45 a.m. The call from Linda Cho's daughter came through Patricia's office line, and Patricia walked it down to Avery personally. Not because it required her to, she could have transferred it, but because she had decided, somewhere in the last 24 hours, that Avery Kaine had spent enough time receiving things through intermediaries and official channels. Some things deserved to be delivered directly by someone who understood their value. She found Avery in the supply room again. The same supply room, the same shelf. Though this time Avery was not counting inventory, but sitting on the step stool with Daniel's drawing in her hand, looking at it with the focused attention of someone reading something in a language they are still learning. Patricia knocked on the doorframe. "Phone call," she said. "It's Maya Cho." Avery looked up. "How old did Linda say she was?" 9, Patricia said. Avery stood up. She took the phone. Maya Cho had the voice of a 9-year-old who had been told that this was an important phone call and had decided to be equal to it. Careful, articulate, slightly formal in the way children are formal when they are trying very hard. "Hi," she said. "Are you Avery?" "I am," Avery said. "My mom said it was okay to call." A pause. "I wanted to say thank you for taking care of the kids at your hospital." Another pause. "My dad used to say that the mission was always about the kids. That's why you do it. For the kids." Avery's hand tightened on the phone. "He was right," she said. "He was exactly right." "I have a picture of him," Maya said, "in his uniform. My mom keeps it in the living room." A pause that carried the weight of something a 9-year-old has been thinking about seriously. "Do you have a picture of him?" "I have something better than a picture," Avery said. "I have memories, real ones, of who he was when things were hard." She paused. "Your dad never once complained. Not once in 8 years. He just did the work. He was the best person I ever worked alongside." A silence on the line that was the silence of a child receiving a specific kind of gift. The kind you can't buy or manufacture. The kind that comes only from first-hand witness. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said. "Anything," Avery said. "Do you think he can see you? What you're doing now? Do you think he knows?" Avery closed her eyes. She stood in the hallway of Mercy Heights Medical Center with Linda Cho's daughter's voice in her ear and her own hand pressed against the folded drawing in her pocket, and she let the question be as large as it was. She didn't make it smaller. She didn't manage it. She let it sit in her chest at full size, and she thought about David Cho, who had a 3-year-old the last time she saw him, and she thought about the compound, and she thought about this building and these children, and the particular thread that ran from that night to this morning without breaking. "I think," she said slowly, "that the things we do for the right reasons, they don't end. They keep going. They go further than we can see." She paused. "So yeah, Maya, I think he knows." Another silence. Then quietly, "Me too." They talked for 3 more minutes. Small things. The way you talk to a 9-year-old when you want to hear more of her voice. And when they said goodbye, Avery stood in the hallway for a long time afterward, not moving, not performing steadiness, just being inside the moment until it was ready to become the next one. 1:17 p.m. Thursday arrived the way important days sometimes do, unremarkably, with no acknowledgement of its own significance. Avery drove to the meeting with Dr. Susan Park in her 2019 Honda with the cracked side mirror she kept meaning to fix, wearing her good jeans in a clean navy sweater, and she found the office without getting lost, which she took as a reasonable omen. Dr. Park was 52, precise, with the particular energy of someone who has spent 2 decades trying to solve a problem that nobody else had properly defined yet. She had the program documentation spread across the conference table before Avery sat down, and she walked through it without preamble, because she had read enough about Avery Kaine in the past 4 days to understand that preamble was not a language they shared. The program was called SHIELD, Stabilization and Hostage Intervention through Emotional and Linguistic De-escalation. It was in its 3rd year of development, federally funded through a Department of Health and Human Services grant, academically partnered with UW's School of Medicine, and had been rolled out in prototype form in 4 Pacific Northwest hospitals. The clinical director position had been open since the program's second lead had taken a private sector job 18 months ago, and the board had been waiting for the right person with a specific combination of skills that the role required: medical knowledge, tactical experience, de-escalation training, and the thing that Dr. Park described last, and that she seemed to weigh most heavily: credibility with staff, Dr. Park said. Not theoretical credibility, real credibility. The kind that comes from having done the thing, not studied it. She looked at Avery. What you did in that corridor 2 nights ago, that was SHIELD methodology executed in real time at a level our trainees spend 8 months trying to approximate. She paused. You did it instinctively. Not instinctively, Avery said. Trained. There's a difference. Dr. Park nodded, and something in her expression shifted. A small confirmation, a recognition. That distinction is exactly what this program needs someone to teach, she said. The difference between reaction and decision, between fear and choice. She looked at Avery steadily. The nurses who will go through this program, they're good nurses. They work hard. They care about their patients. What they need is the framework to act under pressure instead of freeze. You have that framework. You built it over 8 years. I'm asking you to help us give it to other people. Avery looked at the documents on the table. She thought about Carla, freezing beside her in the corridor. She thought about the 3 nurses who had dropped behind the station counter. She thought about what would have happened if she hadn't been there. And more than that, she thought about what would happen next time, at a different hospital, on a different floor, where nobody with her particular history happened to be on shift. How many hospitals are in the expansion plan? She asked. Dr. Park pulled a document from the stack. 37 across 11 states over 3 years. If funding holds, 62 within 5 years. She pushed the document across the table. Your name would be on the curriculum, your methodology. What you built through experience would be formalized and transferable. Avery looked at the document. She looked at the list of hospitals. She thought about what Carla had said in the corridor. It always ends, every single time. She thought about David saying the mission is always about the kids. She thought about Daniel's drawing in her pocket, the circle, the shield, the 2 figures standing inside it together. I have conditions, she said. Dr. Park leaned forward slightly. Tell me. I keep my position at Mercy Heights. Reduced hours, negotiated with the hospital, but I stay on the ward. She looked at Dr. Park. These kids are why I do this. All of it. I don't leave them for an office. Agreed, Dr. Park said without hesitation. The curriculum names David Cho and Marcus Webb as contributors to the foundational methodology. She held Dr. Park's gaze. Their families deserve to know their service reached further than the mission they died on. Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'll make it happen personally. And the program has to be honest about what de-escalation is and isn't, Avery said. It's not a guarantee. Sometimes it fails. Sometimes the threat is real, and the intervention is physical. We train for both. We don't pretend the dangerous part doesn't exist. That's already in the framework, Dr. Park said. I wouldn't have it any other way. Avery looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up. I'll take it, she said. Dr. Park reached across the table and shook her hand, and her grip was firm and direct and carried nothing performative in it. Good, she said. Let's build something. 3:44 p.m. She told Patricia first. She came back to Mercy Heights directly from the meeting and walked into Patricia's office and sat down and said it plainly. The program, the scope, the conditions she had set, the agreement Dr. Park had made. Patricia listened with her hands folded on her desk and her expression doing the thing it did when she was processing something important, going very still, like a body of water before a weather system moves through it. When Avery finished, Patricia said, the reduced hours, what does that mean for the ward? 3 nights a week instead of 5, Avery said. I want to be honest with you about that. Patricia nodded slowly. I'll work the schedule. She looked at Avery. You know you don't need my permission for this. I know, Avery said. I wanted to tell you in person. Patricia looked at her for a long moment, and what passed between them was the accumulated weight of 3 months of a story that had been much larger than either of them had understood while they were living inside it. Then Patricia said, when I hired you, When I pushed back on Brennan and kept you on this floor, I did it on instinct. I couldn't have told you why." She paused. "I think I know why now." "Why?" Avery asked. "Because you walked in here carrying something that this place needed," Patricia said. "And I could feel it even when I couldn't name it." She straightened the already straight papers on her desk. "Go do both things. Be a nurse and build the program. David Cho's name is going to be on something that protects children across the country. I think that matters." "It matters more than I can say," Avery said. Patricia stood up and came around the desk and did something she had done only once before in Avery's presence. She put her hand on Avery's shoulder, briefly and firmly, the way you touch something you want to acknowledge without making fragile. "Go check on your kids," she said. 4:28 p.m. She told Daniel last. She went to his room at the start of the evening hours, when the ward was in its quiet afternoon state, and she sat in the chair beside his bed, and she told him about the program the way you tell a 7-year-old about something important. Directly, without condescension, trusting him with the actual substance of it. She told him that she would be working fewer nights on the ward, but that she was not leaving. She told him about training other nurses in other hospitals so that children in other places would have people on their floors who knew what to do in hard moments. She told him about David Cho and Marcus Webb without using those names, telling him only that there were people who hadn't made it back who deserved to have their work continue. Daniel listened to all of it with his grave, full attention. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So you're going to teach other people to be like you?" "I'm going to try," she said. "That's really good," he said. He said it with the simple, decisive authority of someone who has considered the matter and rendered a verdict. "Because there should be more people like you." She looked at him. "You think so?" "A lot more," he said firmly. "Everywhere, every hospital." He looked at her with his clear, serious eyes. "Every kid should have someone like you on their floor." She held that thought. She let it be as big as it was, not managing it down to something handleable, not putting a frame around it to make it fit. Just letting it sit there at its full, honest size. Every kid should have someone like you on their floor. It was the simplest version of everything she had been working toward since she left the military and gotten lost in a hospital hallway and thanked an orderly too softly to hear. It was the thing she had been trying to find words for in a language she hadn't known she was learning. "That's the plan," she said. Daniel nodded, like it was settled, like it was already done. She stayed until his dinner came and watched him eat with the focused commitment of a child taking his recovery seriously, and she adjusted his blanket and checked his monitor and noted his vitals in the chart with numbers that were stable and improving and written correctly. Every one of them, because she had always been capable of getting the numbers right. It had never been a question of capability. It had been a question of whether she was still inside herself enough to bring that capability to bear. And she was. Fully and entirely and without reservation, she was. At 5:45, she stood in the corridor outside his room, and she looked at the ward, at the doors and the lights and the quiet, continuous, essential work of people taking care of children who needed them. And she felt something she had not let herself feel in 2 years. Not pride, not relief, something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. The feeling of being exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what you are supposed to do, for reasons that go all the way down to the bottom of you, and find nothing but solid ground. She put her hand in her pocket and felt the folded drawing, Daniel's shield, the circle drawn around both of them, the tall figure and the small one standing inside it together. She thought about David Cho's daughter asking whether her father knew. She thought about Gerald Marsh typing 3 paragraphs at 2 in the morning while his son breathed steadily beside him. She thought about Rachel Torres saying, "Forward." She thought about the 37 hospitals in 11 states and the nurses who would come through the program, and the corridors in which they would one day stand between a threat and a child with the knowledge of what to do and the discipline to do it. She thought about the compound, and the children who had walked out of it alive, and the two men who had made that possible alongside her. She thought about their names, David and Marcus, not as weight this time, not as debt, but as something else, as foundation, as the ground beneath every step she had taken since, and every step she would take from here. She went back to work, not because the past was finished, not because the grief was gone, or the guilt was resolved, or the weight had lifted completely, but because moving forward was not the same as leaving things behind. You carried what you carried. You moved anyway. You built what you could build with the materials you had, which included everything that had broken you and everything that had held. And you kept going because keeping going was the mission now, not on a compound in the dark, but in a lit corridor in Seattle, with a drawing of a shield in your pocket and 20 children behind the doors on either side of you, and the whole long future of the work ahead. That was what Avery Kaine was. Not a hero in the way stories usually told it, not the version with the cape and the single decisive moment. The real version. The version that showed up 3 nights a week and took the vitals correctly and sat with the frightened children at 3 a.m. and built programs that would outlast her and train people who would carry the work to places she would never go. The version that stayed. The version that kept the promise she had made, not out loud, not to anyone who could hear it, but to herself, in the quiet accounting of a life that had been broken open and rebuilt around the one thing that had always been true, that children deserve to be safe, and that some people were put on this earth to make that so. Avery Kaine was one of those people. She had always been one of those people. And now, finally, without apology and without hiding, the world knew it too.